One thing I would like to propose is a moment's reflection for the loss of some of our friends and comrades who've been doing the things that we're continuing to do here today and will do through the year to come. And particularly for some of you, you'll appreciate that only in the last fortnight, Councillor Judy Billing passed away. I worked with her for many years as part of the IDA's Leadership Academy, developing the councillors of today and of tomorrow. She's a fine stalwart at the Labour Party conference of Labour councillors of the ALG. And I thought it only appropriate, because she spoke at our last virtual conference, that we had a moment's reflection on the work of people like her, the work that we can take forward and continue to make an impact with. So if you're all happy to take a moment's silence, we'll do that first. I'm going to mute myself as well. Thank you. I spoke to Judy at conference, and I'm sure perhaps it would be no surprise to those of you that knew her. She was all about Labour winning elections, but winning them everywhere, because Labour members, Labour supporters, Labour people and Labour issues are everywhere. She proudly represented her council seat for, I think, over 40 years. She encouraged, supported and helped develop Labour councillors all over the country to put Labour's values into action wherever they might need it be. One of the key questions in making that progress is, how does Labour organise, and what are the policies Labour is going to offer to all of the communities of the UK? So our conference today is primarily about understanding what that offer might look like and how it might be fair between the needs, the aspirations, opportunities and challenges of cities, of coastal communities and of country communities. How can we get that right? Duncan Taylor of CALOR is kind of going to give us a presentation now as an illustration of how sometimes, perhaps not the only time under the current government, policy isn't quite fair, sensible or appropriate. So I'm going to hand over shortly to Duncan and his presentation. We'll share the slides after the event. And he's going to take us through an example of something that perhaps could be fairer. Over to you, Duncan, and I'll move the slides on as you want.
Great, thanks, Hywel. It's Duncan Carter rather than Duncan Taylor, but
I'm sorry.
I'm happy with
Taylors
Duncan.
in my life.
I'm happy with Duncan. That's fine. No, great. Well, no, very pleased to have the opportunity to talk with you. And as Hywel said, I'm hoping to give an example of how government policy isn't always fair. I'm talking about, the current government, and hoping to influence any future government by pointing out some of the failures of the existing approach to rural and how it isn't fair. I'm going to be zooming in on rural heat decarbonisation. And obviously, decarbonisation of heat is essential to our net zero journey. So I've got some points about why it's unfair and perhaps some suggestions about how it could be made fairer. Can I have the next slide, please, Hal? Thank you. So just to set out the rural heat decarbonisation challenge, and I obviously see from some of your the areas that you come from that, and given the title of the conference, that many of you have are in rural areas. So there's about so some of this may be familiar to you, but there's about 2 million properties in rural off-grid areas, which is some 4.6 million people. The majority of those, 60%, using heating oil, and the balance is made up with coal, electric storage heating, wood, and also a little bit of LPG, which is the market that the business that CALOR is in at the moment. So those, as you'll be aware, that energy efficiency is not very good in the countryside amongst rural homes. There's a high proportion of hard to treat buildings, and many of those are not easily made suitable for electrification. So just to illustrate that, nearly 50% were built before 1949, and a good chunk, nearly a fifth, were built before 1900. And that makes it very hard to retrofit some of those properties to move them up to the standard level required for heat pumps. So another illustration is you've only got 3% currently at EPC C, and that's shown in the map on the right, where the dark colours show those with a high proportion of homes that are at lower EPC. It also means that rural communities are feeling that cost of living crisis more, because living in less energy efficient homes, then they're clearly paying more for their energy than people in more energy efficient homes. The next slide, please, Hal. So how is it? The government is proposing a rural first approach, which you may or may not be aware of, to heat decarbonisation. So it wants to start with the off-grid properties first. And I think, my view is, we've clearly got to press on with net zero, and we've been perhaps too slow already. But the current approach will exacerbate those rural inequalities that I've sort of briefly outlined before. So the current government proposal is to start phasing out boilers in 2026 for homes, and for larger businesses from 2024. So that's sort of 9 years earlier than homes on the gas grid, which is currently chalked up for 2035. But the problem there is that the current installed heat pump cost is £12,000 for the average rural home, and there's only government support at the moment under the boiler upgrade scheme of £5,000. So there's a big gap in support required to help those homes transition to low carbon heating. And recent polling suggested that 85% of voters wouldn't support their MP if they were to enforce that ban. Next slide, please, Hal. So is it fair that rural households and businesses go first? So rural heat pumps are already a mass-produced item, so it's unlikely that the costs of the heat pumps will fall significantly. France is already rolling out several hundred thousand per year. This is a mass-produced item, and they are effectively like fridges. So it's an established technology. Definitely some opportunity to bring down the cost of installation, but the actual unit itself are very unlikely to fall over in the near term. So that means that those people who go first, which under current government policy would be rural homes, are likely to be paying a high premium for the heat pumps, which doesn't seem terribly fair. So we think a better approach would be to go for those homes which are heat pump ready first, whether they're on or off grid, rather than targeting those rural off-gas grid homes, which, as I outlined at the beginning, are some of the more difficult to treat. So let's go for those homes that are ready for instant electrification. Generally, that's homes later than the 1970s, but it's not an exact science. But those homes that can take it without much alteration, and that allows us to simulate the heat pump market, build skills, and build consumer confidence. And that's exactly the same approach that Octopus Energy is taking, and they are really pushing at the vanguard of heat pump installation and heat pump promotion. Next slide, please, Hal. So this is, where we think hopefully we can come in. So for those homes where a heat pump isn't suitable, and I think there will be some in those rural areas, we think sustainable liquid gases can help. So that's in areas where electrification and hydrogen can't. So we've had our own renewable gas bio-LPG available in the UK since 2018. It works as a drop-in solution for existing LPG boilers, so no changes for consumers or for any of our delivery vehicles. It can work with heat pumps in a hybrid situation, so that allows you to extend the number of homes that heat pumps can go into. It's currently produced as a co-product or byproduct of biodiesel and sustainable aviation fuel production. And we're actually, our parent company is investing in facilities in the UK to bring more indigenous liquid gas to the UK. So we just started construction on the first UK plant in Teesside, which is going to be creating 200 jobs in construction and 50 jobs in the long term. Next slide, please, Hal. So I think, what should a future government, and looking at the polls, that may well be a Labour government. So we should, we should target the heat pump ready homes first, not rural first. So target, that's both on and off grid. We should go for those first. And we must bring forward action on grid homes as well. 2035 is too late. We should focus on energy efficiency first, because the greenest kilowatt is the kilowatt that isn't used, and then move on to low carbon heat. So we need to maximise public funding on the National Energy Efficiency Mission, and we need to have targeted measures for rural homes because they are already far behind those in urban areas. We do need greater support for the able to pay. That difference between £12,000 and the £5,000 government grant is not enough. People do not have £7,000 spare to be spending on a heat pump, particularly now, even those who may be able to pay, in inverted commas. And then we also do need alternatives for those homes that may not be suitable for heat pumps. Some alternatives to woody biomass, which is the only currently supported alternative technology. And that's where we think that our sustainable liquid gases can potentially play a role in those minority of properties where heat pumps aren't suitable. So thank you. That's the end of my slides, Hal. So thank you for listening. You're muted, Hal. Hal.
Thank you. Yes, even how many years in, it's still a challenge for everybody, isn't it? So I think one of the things that really strikes you about that is this sort of sense that slightly too much policy from the centre, as we might call it, Westminster and Whitehall, is perhaps a bit too blunt. It's sort of saying, we need this problem solved. The primary solution is a sort of solution like this, and therefore it almost becomes the only solution. And you've clearly described that there are perhaps different options that are more appropriate in different settings, and how might that play out? So one of the things that I think follows from that, from our point of view, is what does that mean for how policy is developed, and how does it play out in terms of the offers that we're making to the communities of Coast and Country? We used to be quite pro what you might call rural proofing. Policy is created to address an issue or a challenge. It's often a universal one of how does a youngster get the right tertiary education? Is it college? Is it university? Whatever else it might be. Is it apprenticeships? And rural proofing might require a set of different approaches because of what's available to people, logistics, transport, all of those sorts of things. More recently, we're sort of coming around to a slightly different way of looking at that, and we might call it local proofing. So in a sense, in your example, Duncan, I think you were describing local proofing, and that was local proofing by the state of the built environment and the homes that were already there, rather than here's a solution, you must deploy it. So for everybody else on the conference today, what other ways of looking at these challenges might we surface that we can help Labour think through some of these policies, so they, in a sense, make the most of the Devo settlement that ministers are talking about, the work that Gordon Brown has been doing, and understand what that might mean for different approaches to all sorts of policy, and whether it's about energy and decarbonisation, whether it's about the future of schools and education, crime, police services, social care, healthcare, all of those things will play out. So as we go through, if people have observations on those things, please put them in the chat and we'll play them back into questions as might be appropriate.